The maid became best friends with the millionaire's wife until he began looking at her differently. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay close and never miss a new story. The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor as Elena's cloth moved in precise circles, each motion silent despite the grandeur surrounding her. 22 years old, with calloused hands that spoke of necessity and eyes that held more wisdom than her years suggested, she worked with the kind of focus that came from understanding that perfection was not optional, it was survival. The sound of heels on Italian marble echoed from the east wing, sharp and rhythmic, before stopping abruptly. Then silence. The kind of silence that felt wrong in a house this size, like a held breath that might never be released. Elena paused, her cloth hovering over the mahogany banister. In 6 months of working at the Ashworth estate, she had learned to read the house's moods through its sounds. The confident stride of Adrian Ashworth heading to his study, the measured steps of Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, the careful tread of guests who knew they walked on floors worth more than most people's homes. But this silence felt different. Fragile. A muffled sound drifted from the direction of the master wing, something between a sob and a sigh. Elena's training told her to ignore it, to focus on the task at hand, to remain invisible as all good help should. But her instincts, honed by a childhood of watching her mother care for others, pulled her forward. She set down her supplies and moved toward the sound, her rubber-soled shoes silent against the floor that had betrayed Mrs. Ashworth's location moments before. The door to Cecilia Ashworth's dressing room stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of champagne-colored silk and the edge of an ornate vanity mirror. Elena hesitated, her hand suspended inches from the doorframe. Everything in her experience screamed that this was a boundary she should not cross. Then she heard it again, a quiet, broken sound that no amount of money could muffle. Elena knocked softly, 3 gentle taps that barely disturbed the silence. Mrs. Ashworth. Her voice carried the careful neutrality she had perfected over months of service. I apologize for the interruption. I thought I heard. Is everything all right? The silence stretched longer this time, and Elena almost turned away. Then a voice, smaller than she had ever heard it, replied, "Come in." Elena pushed the door open to reveal Cecilia Ashworth, 35 years old, effortlessly elegant, and utterly alone, sitting before a mirror that reflected not confidence but quiet desperation. Her shoulders, usually held with the poise of someone who had never questioned their place in the world, now curved inward as if protecting something fragile. "I'm sorry," Cecilia said, not meeting Elena's eyes in the mirror. "I didn't mean for anyone to." She gestured vaguely at her reflection, where tear tracks had carved thin lines through her carefully applied makeup. "You must think this is ridiculous. A woman who has everything, crying in her designer dressing room." Elena stepped closer, her presence calm rather than intrusive. "I think," she said carefully, "that having everything doesn't mean feeling everything is all right." Cecilia's hands stilled on the silk scarf she had been twisting between her fingers. For the first time, she turned to look directly at Elena rather than at her reflection. "You speak like someone who understands," she said. "I speak like someone who has watched my mother hold too much inside." Elena's voice carried no judgment, only recognition. "Sometimes the biggest houses hold the loneliest hearts." The words hung between them, neither too intimate nor too distant. Cecilia studied Elena's face, the genuine concern there, the absence of pity or calculation. In 6 months, this was the first conversation between them that had nothing to do with schedules or household needs. "Would you?" Cecilia began, then stopped. "Would you sit with me for a moment? Just until I can compose myself." Elena glanced toward the door, considering the risks. Mrs. Henderson had been clear about boundaries, about the importance of maintaining proper distance. But looking at Cecilia's face, Elena saw something that transcended rules, a woman who needed, if only for a moment, to not be alone. She sat on the edge of an ornate chair, close enough to offer presence, but far enough to maintain respect. "What made you sad today?" Elena asked, her tone gentle but direct. Cecilia laughed, but it came out hollow. "Nothing. Everything. The same thing that makes me sad most days. The feeling that I'm disappearing, piece by piece, into someone else's idea of who I should be." Elena nodded, understanding more than Cecilia might expect. My mother used to say that the hardest cage to escape is the one made of other people's expectations. Your mother sounds wise. She was. She died when I was 17, but she taught me that kindness doesn't require permission. Elena paused, then added, and that sometimes the people who seem to have the most are actually carrying the heaviest burdens. They sat in comfortable silence as Cecilia's breathing steadied. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to shift toward evening, casting the dressing room in softer, warmer tones. Elena, Cecilia said finally, her voice stronger now. Thank you for not looking at me like I was broken. We all break sometimes, Elena replied. The question is who we trust to see us while we put ourselves back together. Cecilia smiled then, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from her in months of working in the house. It transformed her face completely, revealing the warmth that expensive composure usually hid. Would you like some tea? Cecilia asked. I mean, would you join me for tea? Not as, well, not as we usually are, but as, I don't know what we are, actually. Elena considered this, aware that they were stepping into uncharted territory. But something in Cecilia's expression, hope mixed with uncertainty, made the decision easy. I would like that very much, Mrs. Ashworth. Cecilia, she corrected gently. If we're going to break rules, we might as well break them properly. The next 3 weeks passed in a way that neither woman could have anticipated. What began as shared tea in the afternoons evolved into conversations that stretched past sunset, confidences exchanged over late-night snacks in the kitchen, and a friendship that grew despite, or perhaps because of, its improbability. Elena learned that Cecilia had studied art history in college but had never pursued it after marriage, that she missed her sister who lived in London, and that she often felt like a beautiful object in her husband's collection rather than a partner in his life. Cecilia discovered that Elena spoke 3 languages fluently, that she had put herself through community college while caring for her dying mother, and that her dream was to one day open a small restaurant where people could feel at home. Their friendship deepened through small rituals. Cecilia began requesting that Elena help her choose her outfits each morning, not because she needed assistance, but because their conversations over fabric and jewelry had become a treasured part of her day. Elena taught Cecilia simple recipes from her childhood, nothing elaborate, but dishes that filled the mansion's sterile kitchen with the warmth of cumin and garlic, laughter, and shared stories. Adrian thinks I've lost my mind, Cecilia confided one evening as they prepared a simple pasta dish together. He came into the kitchen yesterday and found me actually cooking. Said he hadn't seen me do anything so real in years. Elena paused in her stirring. How did that make you feel? Like maybe I was remembering who I used to be. Cecilia's voice grew thoughtful. Before I became Mrs. Adrian Ashworth. Before I learned to smile on cue and make conversation that meant nothing to anyone. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, the sound of simmering sauce and chopping vegetables creating its own rhythm. Elena watched Cecilia move around the kitchen with increasing confidence, her designer clothes replaced with a simple apron, her perfectly styled hair pulled back in a messy bun that made her look years younger. Elena, Cecilia said suddenly, I need you to know something. This friendship, what we have, it's the most real thing in my life right now. I know it's strange, given our circumstances, but I haven't felt like myself in years, and somehow, with you, I remember who that person is. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest, followed immediately by a flicker of concern. The boundaries of their world were becoming blurred, and while she treasured their connection, she understood the precariousness of their situation better than Cecilia might. I treasure our friendship too, Elena said carefully. But we should be mindful of what people might think. Cecilia interrupted, her voice carrying a note of defiance. Elena, I've spent my entire adult life being mindful of what people think. For once, I want to follow what feels right. Before Elena could respond, the kitchen door swung open. Adrian Ashworth stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. His wife, flour dusting her apron, laughing with the maid over a pot of homemade sauce. The laughter died immediately. Elena stepped back instinctively, the invisible lines of hierarchy reasserting themselves in the presence of the house's master. Adrian. Cecilia's voice carried forced brightness. We were just, Elena was teaching me to make her mother's marinara sauce. Isn't that wonderful? Adrian's gaze moved from his wife to Elena, lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Elena kept her eyes downcast, but she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical presence. Interesting, he said finally, his tone neutral. I didn't realize domestic education was part of your duties, Elena. The words carried no overt criticism, but Elena felt their edge nonetheless. Of course not, sir. Mrs. Ashworth simply expressed interest, and She's been teaching me so much, Cecilia interjected, her voice warm with genuine affection. Did you know Elena speaks Italian? And French? She's remarkable, really. Something shifted in Adrian's expression at his wife's obvious admiration. Elena caught the change and felt a subtle chill of warning. Indeed, Adrian said, his eyes returning to Elena. Perhaps you should return to your regular duties now. I believe Mrs. Henderson was looking for you. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Elena nodded, beginning to untie her apron. Oh, but we haven't finished, Cecilia began. The sauce will keep, Elena said gently, her tone designed to smooth over the sudden tension. I can show you the rest tomorrow, if you'd like. Cecilia's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Yes, of course. Tomorrow. As Elena gathered her things and moved toward the door, she felt Adrian's gaze following her. She risked a glance back and caught him watching not with disapproval, but with something more complex, curiosity, perhaps, or assessment. The look lasted only a second, but it was long enough to plant a seed of unease that would grow in the weeks to come. October brought changes to the Ashworth estate that were subtle but unmistakable. The friendship between Cecilia and Elena continued to flourish, but now it carried an undercurrent of observation. Adrian, who had previously been absent or distracted during Elena's presence, began appearing at unexpected moments. He would enter rooms just as the two women were sharing laughter, his expression neutral but his timing suspicious. He began asking Elena direct questions about her background, her education, her plans for the future. Conversations that were perfectly appropriate but felt charged with unspoken purpose. Elena noticed these changes before Cecilia did. Her instincts, sharpened by years of reading rooms and relationships for signs of danger or opportunity, picked up on the shift in Adrian's behavior like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. He's watching you, Elena said one afternoon as she and Cecilia arranged flowers in the sunroom. They had developed the habit of speaking freely during these quiet moments, their conversations ranging from philosophy to gossip with equal enthusiasm. Who's watching me? Cecilia asked, adjusting a lily with the focused concentration she brought to all their shared activities. Your husband. He's watching both of us, actually, but… Elena hesitated, unsure how to articulate her concerns without sounding paranoid or presumptuous. Cecilia looked up from the arrangement, her expression puzzled. Adrian's always been observant. It's what makes him good at business. He notices things other people miss. This feels different, Elena insisted gently. More personal. Personal how? Cecilia's tone carried genuine confusion rather than defensiveness. Elena, you're being mysterious. Before Elena could respond, the sound of footsteps approached the sunroom. Both women looked up to see Adrian in the doorway, his presence somehow more commanding than the space should have allowed. Good afternoon, ladies, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there in previous interactions. The arrangements look beautiful. Elena, your touch with flowers is quite artistic. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Ashworth has excellent taste. I simply follow her guidance. Modest as well as talented, Adrian observed, his gaze fixed on Elena's face. Cecilia is fortunate to have found such a multifaceted companion. The word companion hung in the air with weight that none of them acknowledged directly. Cecilia smiled, pleased by what she interpreted as her husband's approval of their friendship. Elena has been wonderful, she said, reaching over to squeeze Elena's hand in a gesture that was becoming natural between them. She's taught me so much about finding joy in simple things. I feel more like myself than I have in years. Adrian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as he watched his wife's affectionate gesture. When he spoke, his voice carried a note that Elena couldn't quite identify. Yes, I can see that. You do seem different lately, more vibrant. He stayed for a few more minutes, asking about their plans for the afternoon, commenting on the weather, engaging in the kind of casual conversation that would have been unremarkable if not for the undercurrent of attention that Elena felt directed toward her throughout. After he left, Cecilia turned to Elena with triumph in her eyes. See, he approves of our friendship. He thinks it's good for me. Elena nodded and smiled, but the feeling of unease that had been growing for weeks solidified into something closer to dread. Adrian's approval felt less like blessing and more like complication, a recognition that carried implications she wasn't ready to examine. That evening, as Elena prepared to leave for the day, she encountered Adrian in the front hall. He was reviewing papers at the entrance table, his posture casual, but his timing too convenient to be coincidental. "Elena," he said, looking up as she approached. "A moment, please." She stopped, maintaining the respectful distance that had become second nature. "Of course, sir. I wanted to thank you," he began, setting down his papers and giving her his full attention. "What you've done for Cecilia, this friendship you've built, it's made a remarkable difference in her happiness." "Mrs. Ashworth is easy to care about," Elena replied carefully. "She has a generous heart." "She does," Adrian agreed. "But it takes wisdom to recognize that generosity and know how to nurture it. Not everyone would have seen past the circumstances to the person underneath." The compliment felt more intimate than his previous observations, and Elena found herself fighting the urge to step backward. "I should go," she said. "Mrs. Henderson will be expecting my report on tomorrow's preparations." "Of course." But Adrian made no move to return to his papers. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Elena, may I ask you something personal?" Every instinct screamed that she should politely decline, make her excuses, and leave. Instead, she heard herself say, "Certainly, sir." "Are you happy here? In this position, I mean. Does it fulfill you? Or do you see it as temporary, a stepping stone to something else?" The question surprised her with its genuine curiosity. She had expected something more superficial, more easily deflected. "I'm grateful for the position," she said honestly. "It's allowed me financial stability I hadn't known before. But yes, I hope it's temporary. I have dreams that extend beyond domestic work." "What kind of dreams?" Elena hesitated. These were thoughts she had shared only with Cecilia, private hopes that felt vulnerable in the light of Adrian's focused attention. "I'd like to open a restaurant someday," she admitted. "Nothing grand, just a place where people can feel welcome, where food brings them comfort and connection." Adrian nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "A noble ambition. Food as a medium for human connection rather than mere sustenance." "Yes, exactly." Elena felt a flicker of surprise that he understood so readily. "And what draws you to that particular dream?" "My mother used to say that you can tell everything about a person by how they treat others when they're hungry and tired. A good meal, shared with kindness, can change someone's entire day, sometimes their entire perspective." Adrian's gaze softened at this revelation, and for a moment, Elena glimpsed something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not the calculated interest of an employer, but something warmer and more personal. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." They stood in silence for several heartbeats, the space between them charged with an awareness that neither acknowledged. Then Adrian stepped back, the moment passing like a door closing. "Thank you for sharing that with me," he said, his voice returning to its more formal tone. "I hope you'll consider this house a place where your dreams are supported, not hindered." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. As she walked toward the door, she felt his gaze following her, and the warmth of his attention felt like both gift and warning. November arrived with the kind of rain that made the mansion feel both cozier and more isolated. Cecilia and Elena's friendship had settled into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. Morning conversations over coffee, afternoon projects that ranged from rearranging furniture to planning menus for Adrian's business dinners, evening talks that often stretched past the time Elena should have gone home. "Stay for dinner," Cecilia said one particularly stormy evening as they finished arranging books in the library. "Mrs. Henderson has already left, and I hate eating alone when Adrian's working late." Elena glanced toward the windows where rain lashed against the glass and sheets. The idea of walking to the bus stop in this weather held little appeal, but more than that, she found herself reluctant to leave Cecilia's company. "Are you sure? It feels like an imposition." "Elena, we've been through this. You're not an imposition, you're my friend. The best friend I've had in years, if I'm being honest." The simple declaration warmed Elena more than she expected. In her previous positions, she had maintained careful professional distance, understanding that familiarity often led to complications. But with Cecilia, the barriers had dissolved so naturally that their friendship felt inevitable rather than chosen. They prepared dinner together in the kitchen, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared cooking. Cecilia had progressed from hesitant observer to confident partner, her knife work improving with each session, her instincts for seasoning becoming more sure. Adrian was asking about you again yesterday, Cecilia mentioned as she diced onions with careful precision. Elena's hands stilled on the chicken she was seasoning. Oh, he wanted to know about your education, your background. I think he's impressed by how much you know about art and literature. He said it was unusual to find someone with such broad interests in. She stopped abruptly, her cheeks coloring. In someone in my position, Elena finished gently, feeling no offense. It's all right, Cecilia. I know how it looks. I didn't mean it that way. I know you didn't. But your husband isn't wrong. Most people don't expect depth from domestic help. We're supposed to be invisible, functional. Anything beyond that can be complicated. Cecilia set down her knife and turned to face Elena fully. Is that how you feel here? Like you're supposed to be invisible? Elena considered the question carefully. With you? No, never. You see me as a person, as a friend. But with others? She shrugged. It's the nature of the work. What about with Adrian? Do you feel invisible with him? The question carried undertones that Elena wasn't sure Cecilia intended. She thought about Adrian's recent attention, the way his presence seemed to seek her out, the conversations that felt like interviews disguised as casual interest. Your husband sees me, Elena said finally. I'm not sure that's entirely comfortable. Before Cecilia could ask what she meant, the kitchen door opened and Adrian himself appeared, shaking rain from his jacket and bringing with him the scent of cold air and expensive cologne. Something smells incredible in here, he said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation. Please tell me you're not eating alone, Cecilia. I was hoping to join you if the invitation extends to rain-soaked husbands. Of course, Cecilia's face lit up with the uncomplicated pleasure she always showed at her husband's attention. Elena stayed for dinner because of the storm. We've made enough for an army. Adrian's gaze moved to Elena, and she saw something flicker in his expression, pleasure, perhaps, or anticipation. Perfect. Elena, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Not at all, sir. I should probably stay, he said, the word carrying more weight than it should. Please, I'd like to hear more about those restaurant dreams you mentioned. Elena felt Cecilia's surprised glance and realized that Adrian had revealed knowledge of a conversation that hadn't included his wife. The small disclosure felt like a crack in a dam she hadn't realized was holding back dangerous waters. Dinner was unlike any meal Elena had ever shared at the estate. Adrian, freed from the formality of his usual entertaining, proved to be charming company, intelligent, funny, genuinely interested in both women's thoughts on topics ranging from politics to philosophy. He drew Elena into conversations about books she'd read, places she'd traveled during her year abroad after college, dreams she harbored for the future. Cecilia glowed throughout the meal, clearly delighted to have her husband and her dearest friend enjoying each other's company. She encouraged Elena to share stories about her mother, her childhood, her work before coming to the estate. Elena found herself responding more freely than wisdom suggested, drawn by Adrian's focused attention and Cecilia's encouraging presence. You studied in Italy? Adrian asked when Elena mentioned her year in Florence. What drew you there specifically? Art history and language immersion, Elena replied. My college had an exchange program, and I'd been fascinated by Renaissance art since high school. Florence seemed like the obvious choice. And what did you discover there that you couldn't have learned from books? Elena considered the question, aware that both Ashworths were listening with genuine interest. That context changes everything. You can study a painting or a sculpture in photographs, read about the historical period, memorize the techniques. But standing in front of the actual work, in the space it was created for, surrounded by the light and architecture that shaped its creation, that's when you understand that art isn't separate from life. It's life made visible. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. That's beautifully put. Art as life made visible. I'll remember that. Elena has such a poetic way of seeing things, Cecilia added, her voice warm with pride. She's opened my eyes to so much beauty I was missing. The compliment hung in the air, and Elena noticed that Adrian's attention remained fixed on her face as his wife spoke. Something in his gaze made her skin feel warm, made her aware of herself in a way that had nothing to do with Cecilia's presence. As the evening wound down and Elena prepared to leave, Adrian offered to drive her home, an offer that was both practical, given the continuing storm, and completely unprecedented. That's not necessary, Elena protested. The rain is letting up and… I insist, Adrian said, his tone allowing no argument. Cecilia would never forgive me if I let you walk home in this weather. Cecilia nodded emphatically. Absolutely. Adrian, that's very thoughtful. Elena found herself in Adrian's car, a space that felt impossibly intimate after the evening's charged interactions. The rain drummed against the roof as he navigated the dark streets, the dashboard lights casting his profile in sharp relief. Thank you for staying tonight, he said as they drove. Cecilia was happier than I've seen her in months. This friendship you've built with her, it's been transformative. She's been transformative for me as well, Elena replied honestly. I've never had a friend like her. Someone who sees past circumstances to the person underneath? Elena glanced at him, surprised by the echo of her earlier words about Cecilia. Yes, exactly. It's a rare gift, Adrian said quietly. The ability to recognize worth regardless of context. Not everyone possesses it. They had reached Elena's apartment building, a modest complex that seemed even smaller and shabbier in contrast to the luxury she had just left. Adrian put the car in park, but made no move to end their conversation. Elena, he said, his voice carefully neutral. May I ask you something that might seem inappropriate? Every warning bell in Elena's head began ringing. Ah, yes, sir. Do you think Cecilia is happy? Truly happy, I mean, not the version of happiness she presents at social functions. The question caught Elena off guard with its vulnerability. She turned to study Adrian's profile in the dim light, seeing something in his expression she had never noticed before, uncertainty, perhaps even pain. She's happier now than she was 6 months ago, Elena said carefully. But I think she's been lonely for a long time. She needs to feel seen for who she really is, not who she's expected to be. Adrian nodded slowly. And you see her that way? For who she really is. I see someone kind and intelligent and funny. Someone who's forgotten how remarkable she is because she spent so long trying to be what others needed her to be. Including me? The question hung between them, heavy with implications Elena didn't want to examine. She reached for the door handle, suddenly desperate to escape the confines of the car and the conversation that felt like it was veering into dangerous territory. I should go, she said. Thank you for the ride, sir. Elena, her name on his lips, stopped her movement. Thank you for seeing her clearly, and for letting her see herself through your eyes. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice, and escaped into the rain-soaked night. But even after she reached her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted during the evening, something that would change the carefully balanced dynamics of their unusual friendship. December brought the holiday season, and with it, a flurry of social obligations that transformed the estate into a showcase of wealth and hospitality. Cecilia threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm that Elena recognized as both genuine excitement and nervous energy. I want everything to be perfect, Cecilia confided as they planned the menu for the annual Christmas party. Adrian's been so attentive lately, so interested in the details. I feel like we're reconnecting after years of just coexisting. Elena nodded, though her perspective on Adrian's increased attention was complicated by conversations and moments that Cecilia hadn't witnessed. The car ride home had been followed by other small interactions. Hallway conversations that lasted longer than necessary, questions about her opinions on matters that had nothing to do with household management, glances that felt weighted with meaning she didn't want to interpret. He values your happiness, Elena said carefully. He can see how much our friendship means to you. Exactly. He keeps asking about you, actually. Your thoughts on things, your background, your plans. I think he's realized what an exceptional person you are. The word exceptional made Elena's chest tighten with unease. She had learned to be wary of being seen as exceptional by employers. It led to complications that rarely ended well for the employee. As the party date approached, Cecilia insisted that Elena help her choose not just the menu but her dress, her jewelry, even her hairstyle. Their sessions in the dressing room had evolved from practical assistance to intimate conversations where Cecilia shared fears and hopes she claimed to have never voiced aloud. "I feel like I'm becoming myself again," she said one afternoon as Elena helped her try on different gowns. "The woman I was before, I learned to be afraid of taking up too much space, of being too much. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Elena replied, adjusting the drape of emerald silk that made Cecilia's eyes luminous. "You're remembering that you're allowed to be vibrant." "Yes, that's exactly it." Cecilia turned to face Elena directly, her expression serious. "I need you to promise me something." "What kind of promise?" "Promise me that no matter what happens, with the party, with Adrian's work, with anything, you won't leave." "I know I'm asking a lot, but Elena, I can't imagine my life without our friendship now. You've given me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever." Elena felt her throat tighten at the emotion in Cecilia's voice. "Cecilia, I mean it. Whatever I need to do to make staying here worthwhile for you, I'll do it. Better pay, lighter duties, help with your restaurant plans, anything. Just don't leave me alone again." The desperation underlying the request made Elena's heart ache. She reached out and took Cecilia's hands, squeezing gently. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, meaning it completely in that moment. "You're stuck with me." Cecilia's smile was radiant with relief. "Good, because I have plans for us. Real plans. I've been thinking about what you said about wanting to open a restaurant, and I think I can help. Adrian has connections in the restaurant industry, and I have access to capital. We could be partners, you with the vision and skills, me with the resources." Elena stared at her friend, overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer and terrified by its implications. "Cecilia, that's incredibly kind, but nothing. You've given me back my life. Let me help you build yours." Before Elena could respond, Adrian's voice came from the doorway. "Am I interrupting something important?" Both women turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. His wife in evening wear, Elena's hands still clasped in hers, the atmosphere of intimate friendship that had become their norm. "Adrian, perfect timing," Cecilia said, her face lighting up. "I was just telling Elena about my idea for us to go into business together. A restaurant, can you imagine? Elena has such vision, and with our backing, she could create something truly special." Adrian's gaze moved from his wife to Elena, and she saw something flicker in his expression that made her stomach clench with foreboding. "A generous offer," he said, his tone neutral. "Though I'd want to understand the business plan before committing to any investment." "Of course," Cecilia agreed quickly. "Elena, you could put together a proposal, and we could all discuss it. Adrian, you'd be amazed by her insights into hospitality and service. She's brilliant." "I'm sure she is," Adrian replied, his eyes remaining fixed on Elena's face. "Elena, what do you think of Cecilia's proposal?" Elena felt trapped between loyalty and instinct, between gratitude and growing alarm. "It's very generous," she said carefully, "though I'd want to be certain that any business arrangement wouldn't complicate our friendship." "How could it complicate anything?" Cecilia asked, genuinely puzzled. "Business partnerships can strain personal relationships," Elena explained. "I value what we have too much to risk it." "Wise concerns," Adrian observed. "Though with proper boundaries and clear expectations, it's certainly possible to maintain both professional and personal relationships." Something in his tone made Elena look at him sharply. Their eyes met across the room, and she saw in his gaze a challenge that had nothing to do with business partnerships and everything to do with the undercurrents that had been building between them for weeks. "I should think about it," Elena said finally. "It's a big decision." "Of course," Cecilia agreed. "Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere." But as Elena excused herself and left the dressing room, she carried with her the weight of Adrian's continued gaze and the growing certainty that the situation was becoming more complicated than Cecilia realized, and more dangerous than Elena had initially understood. The Christmas party was a triumph of elegance and hospitality, with every detail reflecting the careful planning Elena and Cecilia had invested in the preparations. The mansion blazed with light, filled with the carefully curated guest list of Adrian's business associates, Cecilia's social connections, and a selection of local dignitaries who moved through the rooms with the confident ease of people accustomed to luxury. Elena had intended to remain in the background, her role that evening limited to ensuring the catering staff maintained the high standards the Ashworths expected. But Cecilia had other plans. "I want you to meet some people," she announced, appearing at Elena's elbow as the party reached its peak. "Adrian's been talking to several restaurant owners tonight, and I've told them about your dreams. They're very interested in meeting you." Elena felt a flutter of panic. "Cecilia, I'm working tonight. It wouldn't be appropriate." "Nonsense. You're my friend first, and I want to show you off." Cecilia's eyes sparkled with pride and excitement. "Besides, Adrian specifically asked me to include you in these conversations." Before Elena could protest further, Cecilia guided her across the room to where Adrian stood with a distinguished older man whose expensive suit and confident posture marked him as someone of significance. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Richard Chun," Adrian said, his voice carrying warmth that seemed directed specifically at her. "Richard owns several successful restaurants in the city. I was just telling him about your background and your aspirations." Richard extended his hand with genuine interest. "Adrian tells me you have both the vision and the practical experience to succeed in hospitality. That's a rare combination." Elena shook his hand, acutely aware of the surreal nature of the situation, being introduced as an equal at a party where she should have been invisible staff. "Mr. Ashworth is very kind," she replied carefully. "I have ideas, but I understand the restaurant business is incredibly challenging." "The best ones always are," Richard agreed. "But Adrian speaks very highly of your insights. He mentioned you studied in Italy, that you understand food as cultural connection rather than mere consumption." Elena glanced at Adrian, surprised he had remembered such specific details from their conversations. His attention felt like a spotlight, warming and uncomfortable in equal measure. "Food tells stories," Elena said, finding her footing in familiar territory. "Every dish carries the history of the people who created it, the land it came from, the hands that prepared it. A restaurant should honor those stories while creating new ones." "Beautiful philosophy," Richard said, nodding approvingly. "And practical experience to match, I understand? You've worked in several establishments. Different types of service, yes? I've learned that hospitality is about making people feel seen and valued, regardless of what they're paying or where they come from." Cecilia beamed with pride, her hand touching Elena's arm in a gesture of support and affection. "Isn't she remarkable? I told you, Adrian, Elena sees things the rest of us miss." Adrian's gaze lingered on Elena's face as his wife spoke, and she caught something in his expression that made her pulse quicken with alarm. Not the professional interest of a potential investor, but something more personal, more dangerous. "She certainly does," Adrian agreed, his voice carrying undertones that Elena hoped only she could detect. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Richard expressing genuine interest in Elena's ideas and asking perceptive questions about her business vision. By the time they parted, he had given her his card and expressed interest in meeting again to discuss possibilities. "That was incredible," Cecilia whispered as they moved away from the group. "Did you see how impressed he was? And Adrian, I've never seen him champion someone's ideas like that. He believes in you, Elena." Elena nodded and smiled, but her stomach churned with unease. Adrian's support felt less like professional encouragement and more like personal investment, a distinction that carried implications she didn't want to examine. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations that Cecilia orchestrated with obvious pride in her friend's accomplishments. Elena found herself discussing business concepts with people she had only seen in the society pages, her ideas treated with respect and serious consideration. But throughout it all, she remained aware of Adrian's presence like a magnetic field, pulling her attention even when he was across the room. She caught him watching her during conversations with other guests, saw him intercept servers to ensure her wine glass remained full, noticed the way he steered discussions to highlight her insights and experiences. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Elena prepared to slip away to help with cleanup. But Cecilia caught her arm. "Stay for a nightcap," she insisted. "I want to celebrate how well everything went. You were the hit of the party. Everyone was so impressed." "I should really stay," Adrian added, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Please, I'd like to discuss some of those business concepts you mentioned tonight." Elena found herself in the drawing room with both Ashworths, a glass of expensive cognac warming in her hands as Cecilia recounted the evening's successes with infectious enthusiasm. "Richard was so taken with your ideas," Cecilia said, curled up on the sofa beside Elena with the comfortable intimacy their friendship had developed. "And Margaret Sinclair, she owns that chain of boutique hotels. She wants to talk to you about consulting on their restaurant concepts." "It's overwhelming," Elena admitted. "6 months ago, I was simply trying to make rent. Now I'm discussing business partnerships with people I've only read about in magazines." "Dreams have a way of accelerating when you find the right supporters," Adrian observed from his position near the fireplace. The light cast his features in sharp relief, emphasizing the intensity of his gaze as it remained fixed on Elena. "Yes, but it's Elena's talent that's making this possible," Cecilia said loyally. "We're just helping create opportunities for people to see what we've always known, that she's extraordinary." The word hung in the air between them, and Elena saw Adrian's expression shift at his wife's declaration. Something flickered across his features, recognition, perhaps, or acknowledgement of a truth he had been avoiding. "Extraordinary," he repeated quietly. "Yes, that's accurate." The way he said it made Elena's breath catch. There was something in his tone that went beyond professional appreciation, something that made Cecilia glance between her husband and her friend with the first flicker of awareness that the dynamics in the room might be more complex than she had realized. "I should go," Elena said abruptly, setting down her glass. "It's late, and tomorrow we'll be busy with cleanup." "Elena," Cecilia began. "Thank you both for tonight," Elena continued, standing quickly. "For the introductions, the opportunities, everything. It means more than I can say." She moved toward the door, but Adrian's voice stopped her. "Elena." She turned back to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart race with equal parts attraction and terror. "Tonight was just the beginning," he said. "There's so much more we can do to support your dreams." The word "we" felt weighted with promise and threat in equal measure. Elena nodded wordlessly and fled, leaving behind the warmth of the drawing room and the dangerous comfort of feeling seen, valued, and desired by people who had the power to change her life completely, for better or worse. January brought a shift in the household's rhythms that Elena initially attributed to post-holiday adjustment. But as the weeks progressed, she began to recognize patterns that had nothing to do with seasonal change and everything to do with the growing complexity of her relationships with both Ashworths. Cecilia's enthusiasm for their friendship had evolved into something approaching dependence. She sought Elena's opinion on everything from wardrobe choices to social plans, insisted on their daily tea sessions even when Elena's duties required attention elsewhere, and spoke constantly about their future business partnership as if it were already decided rather than merely discussed. "I've been thinking about the restaurant concept," Cecilia said one afternoon as they arranged flowers in the conservatory. "What if we started with something smaller? A cafe, maybe, or catering services. Something to test your ideas before we commit to a full restaurant." Elena paused in her arrangement of white roses, considering how to respond. Cecilia's offer was generous beyond measure, but it came with strings that Elena was only beginning to understand. "That's thoughtful," she said carefully. "But I want to be sure we're making decisions for the right reasons. Business partnerships can be complicated, especially between friends." "What do you mean, complicated?" Cecilia's tone carried a note of hurt. "Elena, I thought you trusted me." "I do trust you. Completely. But I also know that mixing money with friendship changes things. I don't want our relationship to become about obligation or expectation." Cecilia set down her pruning shears and turned to face Elena directly. "Is that really what you're worried about? Or is there something else bothering you?" The question was perceptive enough to make Elena uncomfortable. How could she explain the growing unease she felt about Adrian's attention without sounding paranoid or presumptuous? How could she articulate the sense that their friendship was becoming a stage for dynamics she didn't fully understand? "I just think we should be careful," Elena said finally. "Sometimes when things feel too good to be true, it's because they are." Before Cecilia could respond, Adrian's voice carried through the conservatory door. "Ladies, may I interrupt? Elena, I have those contacts I mentioned, the investors interested in restaurant concepts. Do you have a moment to discuss timing?" Elena's pulse quickened at his appearance, as it had been doing with increasing frequency. Adrian had been finding reasons to seek her out almost daily, their conversations ranging from business topics to personal philosophy, each interaction leaving her more confused about his intentions. "Of course," she replied, though her instincts screamed caution. "Wonderful. I'll leave you two to talk business," Cecilia said, gathering her things with obvious pleasure. "Elena, you can tell me all about it later." As Cecilia left, Elena found herself alone with Adrian in the sun-drenched space, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the weight of his focused attention. "The investors are genuinely interested," Adrian began, but his tone suggested that business was not his primary concern. "They're looking for exactly the kind of authentic, story-driven concept you described." "That's encouraging," Elena replied, maintaining careful distance between them. "Elena," Adrian said, stepping closer, "may I speak frankly?" Every warning bell in her head began ringing. "Sir, I'm not sure. These past few months, watching you with Cecilia, seeing the way you've transformed her life, it's been remarkable. But more than that, getting to know you as a person, understanding your dreams and perspectives, it's opened my eyes to things I didn't realize I was missing." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Mr. Ashworth." "Adrian, please." He moved closer still, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Elena, I need you to know that my interest in supporting your dreams isn't purely altruistic." "I don't understand." But she did understand, and the knowledge filled her with dread. "I think you do." His voice carried a gentle certainty that made her skin prickle with awareness. "There's something between us, Elena. Something that goes beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship with my wife. You feel it too. I can see it in the way you look at me, the way you respond when we talk." Elena stepped backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Ashworth, I think you're misinterpreting." "Am I?" He didn't follow her movement, but his gaze held her as effectively as physical touch. "Elena, I'm not asking you to act on it. I'm not asking you to betray Cecilia or compromise your principles. I'm simply acknowledging what exists between us." "Nothing exists between us," Elena said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "You're married to my dearest friend. Whatever you think you're feeling. What I'm feeling is admiration for a woman of intelligence and integrity. What I'm feeling is attraction to someone who sees the world with clarity and compassion. What I'm feeling is connection with a person who challenges me to be better than I am." Each word felt like both gift and trap. Elena understood that Adrian was offering her something, recognition, respect, perhaps even love, that most people in her position could never hope to receive. But she also understood that accepting such an offer would destroy the friendship that had become the most precious thing in her life. "Your wife loves you," she said desperately. "And she trusts me. I won't. I can't." "I'm not asking you to hurt Cecilia," Adrian interrupted gently. "I'm asking you to consider that relationships are more complex than simple categories. It's possible to care deeply for my wife while also recognizing what you mean to me." "What I mean to you?" Elena's voice rose slightly. "Mr. Ashworth, I clean your house. I'm employed by you. Whatever feelings you think." "Stop." The word was quiet but commanding. "Don't diminish what this is by reducing it to employer and employee. You're extraordinary, Elena, and you deserve to be seen as such by people who appreciate your worth." The compliment hit its mark, warming parts of Elena's heart that she had kept carefully protected. To be seen as extraordinary by someone of Adrian's intelligence and success was intoxicating, even as it terrified her. "I need to go," she said, moving toward the door. "Elena." Her name on his lips stopped her movement once again. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm not asking you to make any decisions that would compromise your relationship with Cecilia or your own values. I'm simply asking you to acknowledge that what we have is real and significant." Elena turned back to look at him, seeing in his expression a vulnerability that made him seem less like an untouchable millionaire and more like a man struggling with feelings he hadn't expected. "What we have," she said quietly, "is dangerous. For everyone involved. Perhaps. But it's also beautiful." Elena fled then, leaving Adrian alone among the flowers, her heart pounding with the weight of confession and temptation. As she made her way through the house, she carried with her the knowledge that everything had changed, that the careful balance she had been maintaining was no longer sustainable, and that choices lay ahead that would test everything she believed about loyalty, friendship, and love. February arrived like a held breath, the entire household seeming to exist in a state of suspended tension that only Elena fully recognized. Cecilia, buoyed by the success of the Christmas party and excited about potential business ventures, remained oblivious to the undercurrents that had begun to define Elena's daily existence. But Elena felt the shift in every interaction, every shared glance, every carefully neutral conversation that carried subtext heavy enough to drown in. Adrian had not repeated his confession from the conservatory, but his behavior had changed in subtle ways that made his feelings impossible to ignore. He found reasons to be present during Elena and Cecilia's tea times, contributing to conversations about art and literature with insights that revealed the depth of his intelligence. He asked Elena's opinion on business matters that had nothing to do with household management, treating her perspectives with respect that bordered on reverence. Most dangerously, he had begun to speak of their business partnership, the restaurant venture that Cecilia championed, in terms that made Elena feel like she was being courted rather than simply supported. "Adrian's been so enthusiastic about your restaurant concept," Cecilia confided one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing what had become their traditional daily tea service. "He's scheduled meetings with 3 different investors next week, and he wants you to present your ideas to all of them." Elena's hands stilled on the delicate china cups they had been arranging. "Cecilia, I'm not sure I'm ready for investor meetings. I haven't even put together a formal business plan." "That's what makes it perfect," Cecilia interrupted, her eyes bright with excitement. "You'll be presenting from the heart, sharing your authentic vision without all the corporate polish that makes everything sound the same." Adrian says investors are hungry for exactly that kind of genuine passion. The enthusiasm in Cecilia's voice made Elena's chest tight with guilt. Her friend was so pleased by her husband's support of Elena's dreams, so proud to be facilitating what she saw as a beautiful convergence of personal and professional interests. "Besides," Cecilia continued, "Adrian and I will be there to support you. We're a team in this, the 3 of us working together to make your dreams come true." The image Cecilia painted, the 3 of them as a unified team, felt like both sanctuary and trap. Elena understood that she was being offered opportunities that could transform her life completely. But she also understood that accepting those opportunities would bind her more tightly to a situation that was becoming emotionally unsustainable. "Cecilia," Elena began carefully, "I want you to know how much your friendship means to me. More than business opportunities, more than anything else that's happened here. Your friendship is the most valuable thing in my life." Cecilia's expression softened with affection. "Elena, you don't know how much I needed to hear that. Sometimes I worry that I'm being too demanding of your time, that I'm asking too much of our friendship. You're not demanding anything, but I want to be sure that business doesn't complicate what we have. I want to be sure that no matter what happens with restaurants or investors or anything else, our friendship remains the priority." "Of course it will. Elena, you're like the sister I never had. Nothing could change that." But even as Cecilia spoke the words with complete sincerity, Elena caught sight of Adrian in the doorway, his expression as he watched their interaction carrying the kind of longing that made her stomach clench with dread. He waited until Cecilia excused herself before approaching Elena, his movements careful and deliberate. "You're having doubts about the investor meetings," he observed. "I'm having doubts about everything," Elena replied honestly. "Because of what I told you in the conservatory?" Elena met his gaze directly, seeing in his expression the same vulnerability she had noticed before, a successful, powerful man reduced to uncertainty by feelings he couldn't control. "Because of what's happening between all of us," she said. "Because I can see the way you look at me, and I can see how much Cecilia trusts both of us, and I can see that this situation is becoming impossible." Adrian moved closer, close enough that Elena could feel the warmth of his presence like a physical force. "Elena, I meant what I said about not asking you to betray Cecilia or compromise your principles. But I also meant what I said about acknowledging what exists between us. Pretending these feelings don't exist isn't protecting anyone. It's simply making all of us live in a state of denial." "Some truths are too dangerous to acknowledge," Elena replied. "Some feelings are too destructive to indulge. And some connections are too significant to ignore." Adrian's voice carried quiet intensity that made Elena's pulse quicken despite her resolve. Elena, I'm offering you a chance to build the life you've dreamed of. Not as my employee, not as Cecilia's friend, but as a person whose dreams deserve to be supported by people who recognize your worth. Your wife recognizes my worth. She's offered me the same opportunities you're describing, and she's done it out of pure friendship, without expecting anything in return. And what am I expecting in return? The question hung between them, loaded with implications that Elena didn't want to examine. She understood that Adrian was offering her a choice: accept his support and all that came with it, or continue to maintain boundaries that might ultimately limit her opportunities. I don't know, she admitted. And that's what scares me. Adrian reached out then, his fingers barely grazing her hand in a touch so brief it might have been accidental. But Elena felt the contact like an electric current, reminding her of all the attractions she had been fighting to ignore. What scares me, Adrian said quietly, is the possibility that you'll leave before we have a chance to discover what this could become. What this could become would destroy your marriage and my friendship with Cecilia. Or it could simply add another dimension to relationships that are already more complex than simple categories suggest. Elena stared at him, seeing in his expression a man who had convinced himself that he could have everything he wanted without destroying anything he valued. The dangerous optimism of someone who had never faced a choice that couldn't be resolved through wealth and power. Life doesn't work that way, she said gently. Love doesn't work that way. Some choices require sacrifice. And which choice would you make, Elena, if you had to choose? The question felt like a test, and Elena understood that her answer would shape everything that followed. She looked at Adrian, handsome, intelligent, successful, offering her dreams she had never dared to imagine. Then she thought of Cecilia's trust, their friendship, the sister bond that had become her anchor in a world that had often felt hostile and uncertain. I would choose to protect the people I love from being hurt by my choices, she said finally. Adrian nodded slowly, and Elena saw in his expression something that looked like both disappointment and respect. Even if it meant sacrificing your own happiness? Especially then. They stood in silence for several heartbeats, the weight of confession and decision settling between them. Then Adrian stepped back, the moment passing like a door closing. The investor meetings are still available if you want them, he said, his tone returning to something approaching professional neutrality. Whatever exists between us personally doesn't change the fact that your dreams deserve support. Elena nodded, though she understood that everything had changed, that accepting his professional support would now carry personal implications that could never be fully separated. I'll think about it, she said. But as she watched Adrian leave the kitchen, Elena carried with her the certainty that thinking was no longer enough, that the time for decision was approaching, and that whatever choice she made would require her to sacrifice something precious and irreplaceable. March brought the first hints of spring, and with them a restlessness that seemed to infect everyone in the household. Cecilia threw herself into planning a garden party for Adrian's birthday, her enthusiasm for the project matched only by her insistence that Elena be involved in every detail. I want this to be perfect, Cecilia confided as they walked through the estate's gardens, discussing placement for tables and entertainment. Adrian's been under so much stress lately with work, and I feel like we've been distant. This party, I wanted to remind him of all the good things in our life together. Elena noticed the wistful quality in Cecilia's voice and felt her chest tighten with guilt. Her friend was fighting to reconnect with a husband whose attention had become focused elsewhere, and Elena was the unwitting obstacle to that reconnection. He loves you, Cecilia, Elena said gently. Whatever distance you're feeling, it's probably just temporary stress. I hope so. But Elena, lately I feel like he's somewhere else even when he's right beside me. Like his mind is occupied with something I'm not part of. The accuracy of Cecilia's perception made Elena's stomach clench with shame. Adrian's mind was indeed occupied, and Elena was the reason for that occupation. Maybe the party will help, Elena offered weakly. I hope so, and I want you to be there, not as staff, but as a guest. You're family to me, Elena, and I want Adrian to see how important you are in our lives. The irony of the statement was almost unbearable. Adrian already understood exactly how important Elena had become, but not in the way Cecilia intended. As they continued their planning walk, Elena became aware of a figure watching them from the study window. Adrian stood silhouetted against the glass, his attention fixed on their progress through the garden with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle with awareness. "He's watching us," Elena said quietly. Cecilia looked up and waved enthusiastically at her husband, her face lighting up with the uncomplicated pleasure she always showed at his attention. Adrian raised his hand in response, but Elena could see that his gaze remained focused on her rather than his wife. "See? He's taking interest in what we're doing. That's a good sign, isn't it?" Elena nodded and smiled, but the weight of Adrian's continued observation felt like pressure that would eventually become unbearable. That evening, as Elena prepared to leave for the day, Adrian appeared in the front hall with timing that had become suspiciously consistent. "Elena, a moment, please?" She paused, her coat half on, every instinct screaming that she should make polite excuses and leave immediately. "The investor meetings I mentioned," Adrian began. "I've scheduled them for next week. 3 different groups, all looking for exactly the kind of authentic concept you've described." "Mr. Ashworth." "Adrian," he corrected gently. "Elena, these are legitimate business opportunities. Whatever personal feelings exist between us, you deserve the chance to pursue your dreams. And if I accept these meetings, what happens then? Do I become indebted to you? Do I become part of some arrangement that I don't fully understand?" Adrian's expression grew thoughtful. "What arrangement do you think I'm proposing?" "I don't know, and that's the problem. I don't know what you want from me, what you expect, what you think this," she gestured between them, "could or should become. I think," Adrian said carefully, "that I want to see you succeed because your success would make the world a better place. I think I want to support your dreams because supporting extraordinary people is one of the privileges of having resources. And I think I want to explore what exists between us because connections like this are rare and precious and shouldn't be dismissed without consideration." "And your wife? Where does Cecilia fit into this arrangement?" "Cecilia fits where she has always fit, as someone I care about deeply and want to protect from unnecessary pain." "Unnecessary pain." Elena's voice rose slightly. "Adrian, what we're discussing would destroy her. It would destroy our friendship, her trust, her marriage, everything she values most. Only if we handle it destructively. Elena, relationships don't have to be either-or propositions. It's possible to care deeply for multiple people in different ways." Elena stared at him, seeing a man who had convinced himself that he could reshape reality to accommodate his desires without acknowledging the cost to others. "That's not how love works," she said quietly. "Love requires sacrifice, requires choosing, requires sometimes walking away from what we want in order to protect what matters most." "And what matters most to you, Elena?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena understood that her answer would determine everything that followed. "Cecilia's happiness," she said without hesitation. "Her trust, her friendship, her marriage. Those things matter more to me than any opportunity or feeling or possibility you might offer." Adrian nodded slowly, and Elena saw in his expression something that looked like both admiration and disappointment. "Even if it means giving up your dreams." "Dreams change. Friendships like ours are irreplaceable." They stood in silence for several heartbeats, the weight of decision settling between them. Then Adrian spoke, his voice carrying quiet resignation. "The investor meetings will remain available if you change your mind. But Elena," he paused, seeming to struggle with words, "I hope you understand that what I feel for you isn't casual or selfish. I hope you understand that recognizing your worth isn't the same as trying to possess it." Elena felt tears threaten at the genuine emotion in his voice. "I do understand that. And I hope you understand that walking away isn't rejection, it's protection." As she left the house that evening, Elena carried with her the weight of a choice made and the certainty that the situation had become unsustainable. Something would have to change, and soon, before the careful balance she had been maintaining collapsed entirely and destroyed everything she had come to value. The breaking point came on a storm-lashed evening in late March, when fate conspired to make the carefully hidden tensions impossible to ignore any longer. Elena had stayed late to help Cecilia with final preparations for Adrian's birthday party, their conversation flowing with the easy intimacy their friendship had developed over months of shared confidences. "I don't know what I would have done this past year without you," Cecilia confided as they arranged flowers in the drawing room. "Elena, You've given me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. You've reminded me that I'm allowed to be vibrant, allowed to take up space, allowed to have dreams and opinions and real friendships." The emotion in Cecilia's voice made Elena's throat tighten with guilt and love in equal measure. "You've given me just as much, Cecilia. This friendship, it's the most real thing in my life. Promise me something," Cecilia said suddenly, turning to face Elena with an intensity that was unusual even for their intimate conversations. "Promise me that no matter what changes in our lives, marriage, business ventures, whatever the future holds, you'll never leave me behind. I can't go back to being alone in my own life." Elena felt her heart break at the unconscious prophecy in her friend's words. "Cecilia, I mean it. I know I'm asking a lot, but Elena, you're the sister I never had, the friend I'd given up hope of finding. Whatever I need to do to keep you in my life, I'll do it." The desperate love in Cecilia's voice was almost unbearable, especially given Elena's growing certainty that their friendship was living on borrowed time. She reached out and took Cecilia's hands, squeezing them gently. "You don't need to do anything to keep me," Elena said, meaning it completely even as she felt the weight of impossible circumstances pressing down on them both. "Our friendship isn't conditional." Before Cecilia could respond, the drawing room door opened and Adrian appeared, his hair slightly damp from rain, his expression carrying the careful neutrality he had maintained in group settings since their confrontation in the hall. "Ladies, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Adrian, perfect timing," Cecilia said, her face lighting up with the uncomplicated pleasure she always showed at her husband's attention. "Elena and I were just finishing the final details for your party. I think you're going to be so pleased. We've thought of everything." Adrian's gaze moved from his wife to Elena, and she caught the flicker of something in his expression that made her pulse quicken with familiar alarm. "I'm sure it will be perfect," he said. "Cecilia, you have impeccable taste." And Elena, his voice carried warmth that felt directed specifically at her. "Your attention to detail is extraordinary." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment and the way Adrian's eyes lingered on her face as he delivered it. She glanced at Cecilia and caught her friend watching the exchange with the first flicker of awareness that something in the dynamic might be more complex than she had realized. "Elena's been wonderful," Cecilia said slowly, her tone carrying a note Elena had never heard before. Uncertainty mixed with something that might have been suspicion. The silence that followed felt charged with tension that none of them acknowledged directly. Then Adrian spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Cecilia, I need to discuss some business matters with Elena regarding the investor meetings we've arranged. Would you mind giving us a few minutes?" Elena's stomach dropped at the request. Everything in her experience screamed that being alone with Adrian right now, in front of Cecilia, was dangerous for everyone involved. "I should really be going," Elena said quickly. "It's late, and tomorrow we'll be busy with final preparations." "This will only take a moment," Adrian insisted, his tone allowing no argument. "The investors are expecting a response tomorrow, and we need to finalize the details." Cecilia looked between her husband and her friend, her expression growing more uncertain. "What investor meetings?" "Elena, you didn't mention." "It's a business opportunity Adrian has been developing," Elena said carefully, trying to minimize the significance. "Nothing definite, just preliminary discussions." "What kind of business opportunity?" The question carried weight that Elena recognized as the first crack in the foundation of trust their friendship had been built on. She glanced at Adrian and saw in his expression a challenge. He was forcing the situation toward revelation, whether consciously or not. "The restaurant concept we've discussed," Adrian said. "I've arranged meetings with several investment groups who are interested in Elena's vision." Cecilia's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that looked disturbingly like hurt. "Restaurant concept? Elena, I thought we were going to be partners in that. I thought we were developing those plans together." Elena felt trapped between loyalty and honesty, between protecting Cecilia's feelings and acknowledging the reality of what had been developing. "We were," Elena said carefully. "Adrian was simply exploring additional options. Additional options that apparently didn't include me." Cecilia's voice carried a note Elena had never heard before. Cool assessment that suggested their friend was more perceptive than either of them had realized. "Cecilia, that's not," Adrian began. I think, Cecilia interrupted, her tone growing sharper, that I'd like to understand exactly what's been happening between my husband and my best friend that I haven't been part of. The directness of the question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could deflect, minimize, protect Cecilia from a truth that would destroy her happiness, or she could acknowledge what had been growing in the shadows of their friendship. There's nothing happening, Elena said finally, the words feeling both true and utterly inadequate. Nothing. Cecilia's gaze moved between them, taking in details Elena hadn't realized were visible. The careful distance she maintained from Adrian, the way his attention seemed to seek her out, the tension that crackled between them despite their efforts at neutrality. Because it certainly feels like something is happening. Adrian stepped forward, his expression serious. Cecilia, Elena is right that nothing inappropriate has occurred, but she's wrong that nothing is happening. I think it's time we were honest about the situation we've all been navigating. Adrian, don't. Elena began, alarmed by the dangerous direction of the conversation. No, Elena. Cecilia deserves the truth. Adrian turned to face his wife directly. Cecilia, over the past months, as I've watched Elena transform your life and gotten to know her as a person, I've developed feelings that go beyond professional or casual friendship. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. Cecilia stared at her husband, her expression cycling through disbelief, understanding, and devastation. Feelings, she repeated quietly. Deep respect, admiration, and yes, attraction, Adrian continued, his tone steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. Elena has never encouraged these feelings or responded inappropriately to them. She's been nothing but loyal to you and to the boundaries of her position here. Elena watched her dearest friend process this information, seeing the exact moment when understanding crystallized into heartbreak. How long? Cecilia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The feelings developed gradually, Adrian replied. But I became conscious of them around Christmas. Christmas. Cecilia's voice carried hollow recognition. When you started being so supportive of Elena's dreams. When you started including her in business conversations. When you started looking at her like. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Elena felt her world dissolving around her as she watched her friend's face crumble with the weight of betrayal, not just from her husband, but from the person she had trusted most completely. Cecilia, Elena said desperately, reaching toward her friend. Please let me explain. Explain what? Cecilia's voice carried a brittleness that Elena had never heard before. Explain how my husband has been falling in love with my best friend? Explain how the two people I trust most in the world have been carrying on some kind of emotional affair behind my back. It's not like that, Elena protested, though even as she spoke the words, she understood how hollow they must sound. I never encouraged, I never wanted. But you knew. Cecilia's statement cut through Elena's protests like a blade. You knew how he was feeling, and you didn't tell me. You let me go on planning business partnerships and celebrating his support of your dreams, never knowing that his interest wasn't professional. The accuracy of the accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. She had known, had seen the signs, had felt the dangerous undercurrents for months. And in choosing to protect Cecilia from that knowledge, she had ultimately betrayed her more completely than if she had spoken the truth from the beginning. I was trying to protect you, Elena whispered. Protect me. Cecilia's laugh held no humor. Elena, you let me make a fool of myself. You let me push my husband toward the woman he was already falling for. You let me plan your future while mine was crumbling, and you said nothing. The pain in Cecilia's voice was unbearable, but Elena forced herself to listen, to absorb the full weight of her friend's anguish. You're right, Elena said quietly. I should have told you. I should have been honest from the moment I realized what was happening. I thought I was sparing you pain, but I was really just making it worse. Adrian stepped forward, his expression carrying the weight of a man who had finally forced a reckoning he had been avoiding. Cecilia, please don't blame Elena for my feelings. She's done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Cecilia turned on her husband with fury Elena had never seen her display. Adrian, she's been living in our house, eating at our table, accepting our friendship and support while knowing that you were developing feelings for her. How is that nothing wrong? Because she never reciprocated, Adrian said firmly. Because every conversation we've had, Elena has made it clear that her loyalty is to you, that she would never do anything to compromise your happiness or our marriage. Cecilia stared at him, her expression cycling through anger, hurt, and something that looked like dawning realization. But you wanted her to reciprocate, she said slowly. You wanted her to choose you over me. The silence that followed the statement was deafening. Elena watched Adrian's face, seeing him struggle with the truth Cecilia had identified so clearly. I wanted, Adrian said finally, to explore what might be possible if the circumstances were different. If the circumstances were different. You mean if you weren't married to me? Cecilia. No. Her voice carried quiet authority that Elena had never heard before. I need to understand exactly what's been happening in my own house. Adrian, are you in love with Elena? The question hung in the air like a sword ready to fall. Elena held her breath, watching Adrian's face as he wrestled with a truth that would change everything. Yes, he said quietly. I am. The admission seemed to leach all the air from the room. Cecilia stood perfectly still for several heartbeats, absorbing the full weight of her husband's confession. And Elena, she continued, her voice steady despite the tears beginning to track down her cheeks. Do you love my husband? Elena felt the question hit her like a physical blow. Everything in her wanted to deny it, to protect Cecilia from this final devastation. But looking at her friend's face, seeing the intelligence there, the need for truth despite its cost, Elena understood that anything less than complete honesty would be the ultimate betrayal. I care about him, Elena said carefully. But Cecilia, I love you more. I love our friendship more than any feeling I might have for anyone else. That's not what I asked. Cecilia's voice carried gentle insistence. Elena, do you love my husband? Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of truth settling on her shoulders like a mantle she had been carrying without acknowledgement. Yes, she whispered. But I will never act on those feelings. Cecilia, you have to believe me. Our friendship means everything to me. More than any possibility with Adrian. More than any dream or opportunity or feeling. You are the most important person in my life. Cecilia nodded slowly, tears flowing freely now. I believe you. That's what makes this so much worse. I believe that you love me, and I believe that you would sacrifice your own happiness to protect mine. But Elena, don't you see what an impossible situation that creates? Elena stared at her friend, beginning to understand the full scope of the tragedy they had all stumbled into. You love him, and he loves you, and you're both trying to protect me from that truth. But living with that truth while pretending it doesn't exist, that's not protecting me. That's creating a life built on denial and sacrifice that will eventually destroy all of us. The clarity in Cecilia's voice was devastating. Elena saw in her friend's expression not just pain, but a terrible wisdom that came from finally seeing the full picture of their situation. What do you want me to do? Elena asked desperately. Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. Leave, stay, forget everything that's happened, whatever you need. Cecilia looked at her with eyes full of love and sadness. Elena, what I need is for you to be happy. What I need is for my husband to be honest about his feelings. What I need is for all of us to stop pretending that good intentions can make an impossible situation sustainable. She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to face both of them. I need time to think. Elena, please don't leave tonight. It's too late, and the storm is getting worse. But tomorrow. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Tomorrow. Elena prompted gently. Tomorrow we're going to have to figure out how to live with the truth we've finally spoken. As Cecilia left the room, Elena and Adrian stood in silence, the weight of revelation settling between them like debris after an explosion. Elena felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. The secret was finally out, but its emergence had destroyed the thing she valued most in the world. I'm sorry, Adrian said quietly. I thought I could manage the situation better, handle my feelings without forcing a confrontation. We both did, Elena replied. But some truths are too big to hide forever. They stood in the drawing room surrounded by flowers arranged for a birthday party that now seemed like a relic from a different life. Both of them understanding that everything had changed irrevocably, and that the choices ahead would require sacrifices that none of them had been prepared to make. Elena spent that night in the guest room that Cecilia had insisted she use, staring at the ceiling while rain lashed against the windows, and her mind raced through the implications of the evening's revelations. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cecilia's face as the truth had dawned. The progression from confusion to understanding to heartbreak that Elena knew she would carry with her for the rest of her life. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything seem both beautiful and fragile. Elena dressed carefully, understanding that this conversation would determine the future of all their relationships, and made her way downstairs to find Cecilia already in the kitchen, preparing coffee with the precise movements of someone using routine to maintain composure. "Good morning," Cecilia said without turning around. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who had spent hours preparing for a difficult conversation. "Good morning," Elena replied, taking a seat at the kitchen table where they had shared so many intimate conversations over the past months. Cecilia poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from Elena, her movements deliberate and controlled. In the morning light, Elena could see the evidence of a sleepless night in the shadows under her friend's eyes, but also something new, a kind of resolved clarity that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking all night," Cecilia began, "about what you said yesterday, about loving our friendship more than your feelings for Adrian. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what makes this conversation so difficult." Cecilia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as if seeking warmth. "Elena, I believe that you would sacrifice your happiness to preserve our friendship. But I also believe that asking you to make that sacrifice would ultimately destroy the friendship we're trying to protect." Elena felt her chest tighten with foreboding. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you stay here, if you try to suppress your feelings for Adrian while maintaining our friendship and working alongside him, eventually the strain will poison everything. You'll grow to resent the sacrifice, or he will, or I'll become so paranoid about your interactions that I'll destroy our friendship through suspicion and jealousy." The analysis was devastating in its accuracy. Elena had been so focused on protecting their immediate happiness that she hadn't considered the long-term impossibility of the situation they had created. "So what are you saying?" Elena asked, though she was beginning to understand where the conversation was heading. "I'm saying that sometimes love means letting go, even when holding on feels like the only option." Before Elena could respond, Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression carrying the weight of his own sleepless night. He looked between the two women, clearly sensing the gravity of their conversation. "May I join you?" he asked quietly. Cecilia nodded, and Adrian took a seat at the table, creating a triangle of tension and unspoken emotion that none of them had ever navigated before. "I was just explaining to Elena," Cecilia said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing, "that I think the kindest thing for all of us would be for her to leave." The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. Elena felt her world tilting on its axis as she processed what her dearest friend was suggesting. "Cecilia, no," Elena said desperately. "I can manage my feelings. I can maintain appropriate boundaries. Please don't ask me to give up our friendship." "Elena, I'm not asking you to give up our friendship. I'm asking you to save it." Cecilia's voice carried gentle firmness. "If you stay, we'll all spend every day walking on eggshells, pretending that the undercurrents don't exist, watching every word and gesture for signs of inappropriate feeling. That's not friendship, that's performance." Adrian leaned forward, his expression intent. "Cecilia, surely there's another way." "Is there?" Cecilia turned to her husband with a directness that surprised both of them. "Adrian, can you honestly tell me that you're prepared to spend the rest of our marriage watching the woman you love clean our house and pretend not to feel anything for you?" The bluntness of the question hit its mark. Adrian's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on something that looked like defeated recognition. "And Elena," Cecilia continued, turning back to her friend, "can you honestly tell me that you're prepared to spend years watching Adrian and me together, maintaining a friendship with me while loving my husband, building a life that requires you to deny the most significant relationship you've ever had?" Elena wanted to protest, to insist that she could manage the sacrifice, that their friendship was worth any personal cost. But looking at Cecilia's face, seeing the wisdom there, the painful clarity, she began to understand that her friend was right. "I don't know how to leave you," Elena whispered. Cecilia, you've been the most important person in my life. The thought of walking away from our friendship is heartbreaking for me too. Cecilia reached across the table and took Elena's hands, her touch warm and familiar. Elena, you have to understand, I'm not angry with you. I'm not punishing you for having feelings you didn't choose and never acted on. I'm trying to give all of us the chance to preserve what we can of the love we share by destroying it, by acknowledging that some forms of love require distance to remain pure. Cecilia's voice carried quiet conviction. Elena, if you stay, our friendship will become twisted by the situation we're all trapped in. If you leave, if you take time to build your own life, pursue your dreams without the complication of these relationships, then maybe someday we can find our way back to each other. Elena felt tears threatening as she processed the devastating logic of her friend's argument. Everything Cecilia was saying made sense, but the emotional cost felt unbearable. What about the restaurant? She asked weakly. The business plans we made will happen somewhere else, with someone else's support, Cecilia said firmly. Elena, your dreams don't depend on us. You have talent and vision and determination. You can build the life you want without accepting help that comes with impossible complications. Adrian had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke, his voice carrying quiet emotion. If Elena leaves, I want her to know that my feelings won't simply disappear. I want her to know that what we've acknowledged isn't casual or temporary. Cecilia turned to her husband with an expression Elena had never seen before, sad but not angry, disappointed but not surprised. I know, Cecilia said quietly. Adrian, I'm not naive about what this means for our marriage. We're going to have to decide whether we can rebuild from this truth or whether it's destroyed something essential between us. But that's a conversation we need to have without Elena being trapped in the middle of it. The mature handling of an impossible situation left Elena feeling both grateful and devastated. Cecilia was protecting everyone. Elena from an unsustainable situation, Adrian from having to choose between competing loyalties, and herself from a friendship that would become poisoned by unresolved feelings. When Elena asked, the word barely audible. Soon, Cecilia replied gently. Give us both time to prepare, but Elena, every day you stay makes it harder for all of us. Elena nodded, understanding that her friend was right even as her heart broke at the necessity of the decision. I need you to know, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion, that this friendship has been the most precious thing in my life. You gave me back my belief in human goodness, in the possibility of connection that transcends circumstances. Whatever happens, I will carry that with me always. Cecilia's composure finally cracked, tears flowing freely as she squeezed Elena's hands. And I need you to know that you saved me from disappearing completely into someone else's expectations. You reminded me that I'm allowed to be real, allowed to take up space, allowed to matter. Elena, you gave me back my sense of self. They sat in the morning-bright kitchen, hands clasped across the table, both understanding that they were saying goodbye to something that had transformed both their lives. Adrian watched this exchange with an expression that combined love and loss in equal measure, recognizing that he was witnessing the end of something beautiful and the beginning of something uncertain. 1 week, Elena said finally. Give me 1 week to find somewhere to go, to make arrangements. And then I'll leave, and we can all try to figure out how to live with the choices we've made. Cecilia nodded, though Elena could see the effort it cost her to agree to the timeline. 1 week, she confirmed. And Elena, when you build your restaurant, when you create the place where people feel welcome and connected, I want you to remember that you learned some of those skills here, in this kitchen, in the warmth we created together. Elena felt her chest tighten with love and loss. I'll remember everything, she promised. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every moment of understanding. Cecilia, you will always be part of who I become. As the conversation wound down and they prepared to begin the painful process of disentangling their lives, Elena carried with her the certainty that she was making the right choice for the wrong reasons, that sometimes love required sacrifice so profound it felt like death, but that true friendship meant being willing to make that sacrifice rather than allow love to become corrupted by impossible circumstances. The week that followed passed in a blur of careful conversations and avoided glances, both women maintaining the routines of their friendship while preparing for its end. Elena found a small apartment across town, accepted a position at a local hotel that would provide income while she developed her restaurant plans, and tried to prepare herself emotionally for the most difficult goodbye of her life. On Elena's final morning at the estate, she woke before dawn and made her way to the kitchen one last time. The familiar space felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, not like home, but like a memory she was already beginning to cherish from a distance. She was surprised to find Cecilia already there, dressed in a simple robe, preparing the tea service they had shared almost every day for nearly a year. "I couldn't sleep," Cecilia said without turning around. "I kept thinking about all the mornings we've shared here." "Me too," Elena replied, taking her usual seat at the table. They prepared the tea together with the synchronized movements of long practice, neither speaking but both acutely aware that this ritual was ending. When they finally sat across from each other, the weight of goodbye hung between them like a physical presence. "I have something for you," Cecilia said, reaching for a small wrapped package she had placed beside her cup. Elena unwrapped it to find a silver pendant on a delicate chain, simple, elegant, and engraved with a single word, "Sister." "I want you to remember," Cecilia said, her voice thick with emotion, "that no matter what happens, no matter how much distance time and circumstances create between us, you will always be the sister I chose, the friend who saved me from disappearing entirely." Elena fastened the chain around her neck, feeling the pendant settle against her heart like a talisman. "And I want you to remember," Elena replied, "that you taught me what friendship could be when it's built on complete honesty and acceptance. Cecilia, you showed me that I'm allowed to take up space, allowed to matter, allowed to have dreams that extend beyond survival." They drank their tea in companionable silence, both trying to memorize the moment. The morning light filtering through the kitchen windows, the familiar scent of Earl Grey and lemon, the comfortable presence of someone who had seen them clearly and loved them anyway. When they finished, Elena stood to leave, understanding that prolonging the goodbye would only make it more painful. "Elena," Cecilia said as they reached the kitchen door, "promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll be happy. Promise me that you'll build the life you've dreamed of, and that when you do, you'll remember that your happiness matters to me more than anything else." Elena felt tears threatening but forced herself to speak clearly. "I promise. And Cecilia, promise me that you'll fight for your marriage if it's what you want, or walk away if it's not. Promise me that you won't disappear back into other people's expectations now that I'm not here to remind you of who you really are." "I promise," Cecilia whispered. They embraced then, holding each other tightly enough to memorize the feeling of safety and acceptance they had found in their friendship. When they finally separated, both women had tears streaming down their faces. "This isn't goodbye forever," Cecilia said. "Someday, when enough time has passed, when we've both built the lives we're meant to have." "Someday," Elena agreed, though both of them understood that someday might never come, that some sacrifices were permanent. Elena gathered her bags and walked toward the front door, carrying with her everything she owned and the weight of the most difficult choice she had ever made. As she reached the threshold, she turned back for one final look at the house that had been her haven and her heartbreak. Adrian stood at the top of the stairs, his expression carrying all the words they would never speak. Elena met his gaze for a moment, seeing there the same mixture of love and loss she felt in her own heart. "Take care of her," she said quietly, her words carrying across the distance between them. "Take care of yourself," he replied, his voice barely audible. Elena nodded and stepped through the door into the morning light, leaving behind the greatest friendship she had ever known and the love she had never allowed herself to fully acknowledge. As she walked away from the estate, she carried with her the pendant that rested against her heart and the certainty that some forms of love are too precious to be corrupted by possession, that sometimes the greatest gift we can give the people we care about is the freedom to find happiness without us. Behind her, in the house that had been her second home, Cecilia stood at the window watching her dearest friend disappear into her own life, knowing that she had made the right choice for everyone involved, but feeling the cost of that choice settle into her bones like winter. And upstairs, Adrian remained at his post, understanding that he was watching the woman he loved walk away forever, but also understanding that her leaving was the final act of love in a situation that had offered no easy answers. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the estate's manicured grounds, and Elena walked forward into an uncertain future, carrying with her the transformative power of a friendship that had been too beautiful to preserve and too precious to regret. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.